Good evening. It is 6 p.m. on Tuesday, September 7th. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Peoria City Council. Clerk, the mics are open. Can you please call the roll?
Mayor Ali.
Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Present.
Councilmember Sear.
Here.
Councilmember Graham. Here. Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Euler.
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach.
Here.
Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Present.
Councilmember Velpula.
Here.
We have a quorum present, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask you to join me for a moment of silent prayer, as well as followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, please. And we're going to proceed with our agenda, Madam Clerk.
21-254 is a communication from the Mayor and Corporation Council with a request to approve the declaration of local state of emergency.
Can I get a motion to approve? Councilman Ruckriegel, seconded by Councilman Velpula. Can I ask you for your vote, please? Okay. Passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
21-255 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director with a request to hold a policy session on the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds.
Okay. Thank you. This is the start of our communications on the use of American relief funds. Again, the only other meeting that we had specifically that addressed the use of those ARPA funds was the meeting that we had a couple months ago at the Riverfront Museum when we decided to not borrow $10 million and to support some of the costs related to staffing. So this is really our initial discussion, and I'm going to defer to our city manager and also his, I think, 12-page, or, well, I guess there's a 12-page PowerPoint, but there's also a 9-page memo that he sent in advance. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this is just a report back. We did, at the council's direction, go out and solicit public input, so we wanted to report back on that to you this evening, as well as just some initial recommendations pertaining to the fiscal recovery funds, with the understanding that we're on the cusp of departments finalizing their budget requests, and then the finance director and I putting together a recommended budget for your consideration, and that we wanted to take that time to present that information, get the feedback from you on the FRF funds, and build that into a formal recommended budget for 2022 and 2023 that would come back to you at the first meeting in October. So with that, just to recap, the fiscal recovery fund funding objections, and this is the $47 million that we have received, less the $10 million that we've already obligated, is to Congress has laid out 4 key objectives, funding objectives for that. First is to support the urgent COVID-19 response efforts to try and get the disease and the pandemic under control. Second is to replace lost public sector revenue to strengthen support for vital public services and to help retain jobs. Third is to support the immediate economic stabilization for households and businesses. And fourth, to address systemic public health and economic challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. And as we discussed back in June, there were 6 specific areas of eligible use of the fiscal recovery funds. The first being to support the public health response. The second being to address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. Third, to replace the public sector revenue loss. Fourth, to provide premium pay for essential workers on the front lines of the pandemic. And then fifth and sixth were investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So in the first funding category, what does it mean to support the public health response? There were 3 specific areas. First being services to contain and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Second, behavioral health care services. And third, payroll and covered benefits for those public health employees to the extent that they're working on COVID-19. Addressing the negative economic impacts included delivering assistance to workers and families, supporting small business, speeding the recovery of impacted industries, and to rebuild public sector capacity. Under replacing public sector revenue loss, it was to ensure the continuity of vital government services. That in the way that was calculated is they said that you had an opportunity to take a snapshot from your budget in 2019, look at how much revenue you lost in 2020, and then grow that by 4.1% a year to see how much you could apply of those revenues towards that, and you can recalculate every calendar year at the end of every calendar year. So those are the ways that we can look at calculating our public sector revenue loss. When we submitted our first report to the federal government, we identified about $20 million of lost revenue in the very first year of the pandemic. So that was the number that we submitted to the federal government as far as lost revenue. The next section under premium pay for essential workers was to provide premium pay to essential workers, both directly and indirectly, to prioritize low and moderate income workers who face the greatest mismatch between their employment-related health risks and compensation. And then the key sectors here include healthcare, grocery, food services, education, childcare, sanitation, and it had to be additive. So this is the one area where you can add it to the workers' wages and you can look back to when the pandemic started. Everything else has to be looking forward in terms of how you would spend the dollars. Water and sewer infrastructure included improvements to infrastructure such as building and facilities. It was aligned with the Environmental Protection Agency categories for clean water, state revolving loan fund, and the drinking water state revolving loan funds. And then lastly, on broadband infrastructure, it was a focus on households and businesses without access to broadband, and making sure that you could fund projects that would meet a certain minimum level threshold of broadband service, and that it could also then complement any state project that might be moving forward from the state's capital projects funds. They also provided for us additional flexibility for equity-focused services. And this is for those hardest-hit communities and families to address health disparities, invest in housing, address educational disparities, and to promote healthy childhood environments. And it's broadly applicable to qualified census tracts. This is the area that the federal government has determined is a disproportionately impacted area. And for Peoria, the areas that qualify as qualified census tracts, and there's a number of them, are basically from McClure Avenue south in the city. And so that covers from War Memorial Drive up in the north, excuse me, I think that's Abington, moving up in the north, and then coming down around Springdale Cemetery, up to Gale. Once it gets to University, it comes down to McClure, goes over to War Memorial Drive, and then follows the western border of the city of Peoria. And so that's the area. These are the census tract numbers that would be considered qualified census tracts by the federal government. So what are some of the additional services or additional focus that we can provide in that area? First is addressing health disparities. So that could be community health workers and public health benefits navigators, lead paint remediation, community violence intervention programs. It could be households, housing, and neighborhoods. So you could be putting additional resources towards persons experiencing homelessness, affordable housing development, housing vouchers, residential counseling, navigation assistance. It could be educational disparities, looking at expanding early learning services, expanded resources for high-poverty school districts, tutoring and after-school programs. Or it could be promoting healthy childhood environments, which could include new and expanded high-quality childcare, home visiting programs for families, or services for child welfare-involved families. There were ineligible uses as well of the funds. The funds cannot be used to reduce taxes. They cannot be used for extraordinary payments into pension plans. And under Treasury's interpretation, a deposit is distinct and different from a payroll contribution, which occurs when we make payments on a regular interval. We cannot put the money into rainy day funds, so we have to spend the dollars, and it can't be used to fund debt service payments, legal settlements, or judgments. So we created a splash page on our website that was www.peoriagov.org/engage Peoria. And we used this Engage Peoria site to put out a survey for our community to let them weigh in on what they felt were the priorities that we needed to move forward with. The survey was based on the SurveyMonkey tool. The company SurveyMonkey has a pretty intuitive tool, and we made it so that it would take no less than 5 minutes to do, or no more than 5 minutes to do this survey. It was very short. It was open from July 14th to August 23rd. The survey was pushed out on all of our social media platforms. We reached out to our neighborhood associations. We reached out to the GPEDC, our Economic Development Department, reached out to their network through Constant Contact. We talked with the chamber. We had one public meeting in person down at the Lincoln Branch Library, and then we had one virtual meeting that we held. And we had 884 responses to the survey. So we had a great response to the survey overall. In that survey, we asked the public to prioritize what they saw as the ranking of need. And we wanted to identify those 6 areas of potential expense in order to be able to have them weigh in on that. The number one ranked survey response was infrastructure. So the public responded, and the number one top priority was infrastructure from a quantitative ranking, followed by neighborhood revitalization, business support, equity-focused services, operations, and then premium pay for essential workers. So as we looked at that and we ranked and averaged out what the average score was, that's how they showed up in that listing. We then also asked for an open-ended question. We asked what was the biggest issue facing Peoria due to COVID-19. And from this, we had a number of responses that fell into areas of eligible spending. And then as we tried to break those out, we tried to define those a little more detailed in terms of kind of specific issue areas. The top response was the economy. Overwhelmingly, 37% of the respondents said that the negative economic impact on the economy, whether it's on businesses or on employees or individuals, was the biggest issue. Second was the disparities created by the pandemic. So 136 respondents talked about some sort of issue, whether it was poverty, whether it was the inequities inside the city. That came out loud and clear as the next top priority. The third ranking priority after that, in terms of what people were saying was the biggest issue, were cuts to operations. So whether that was cuts to police, fire, public service, public works, that was number 3 with 104 responses there. The fourth response, with 8% of the total, was infrastructure. So this is where people specifically mentioned the state and condition of the city's infrastructure. The next category was under public safety, which was really under public sector revenue loss. And this was different from the talk about reducing our operations. But this is where we were looking at people specifically saying, for example, crime or violence in the city was the number one issue that we were facing. Following that up was comments, 54 comments concerned with the pandemic and our response from a public health perspective and a health perspective. Then next was neighborhoods, with looking at our neighborhoods, and there were 36 comments that were specifically focused on our neighborhoods. There were 27 comments that talked about the mental health and behavioral health aspect of the pandemic, 24 comments that pertained to premium pay, 18 comments that concerned education, and then 15 general comments where somebody just said, I can't answer this, or they had just an overall general comment in terms of their response. That totals about 804 of the responses. Not everyone that filled out the numeric survey filled out this portion of it. So this, and some of the numbers were counted more than once. But overall, that was the kind of the general overall issue areas that were defined as we looked at this from the survey responses. So staff wanted to put together some recommendations for the council pertaining to a number of different areas. The first recommendation that we would make to you is that since we have 4 years to spend these dollars and we have $36 million, a little bit over $36 million remaining, that we look at using about just under $9.2 million a year and try and spread that allocation out over the 4-year period of time to be able to maximize the investments that we can be making over a longer period of time than simply spending it all right now. And so the way that we looked at that from a staff perspective was putting $3.1 million, a little bit over $3.1 million into infrastructure, $2.5 million into neighborhoods, $2.4 million into economic development, about $1 million into some equity-related services that are really looking at coming up with a health equity fund that would be matched by Peoria County, so we'd be leveraging the county's dollars as well to focus on the social determinants of health, and I'll talk about that here in just a second, and also violence reduction, and then some additional dollars to do some marketing. As we roll out additional programs, we're going to have to be able to market these programs and manage the finances of it, so about $200,000 towards the marketing and administration of this. So with that, I'd like to jump into some of the specifics. And with this, as we said earlier, that the quantitative preference of the respondents was to put additional resources into infrastructure. So as staff started looking at this, we looked at sidewalks and street lighting, looked at trying to put in a smart city lighting project, a pilot project where we can start to look at leveraging some of the smart technology resources to help us as we have challenges when it comes to illegal dumping or other issues, that we could look at that as a pilot. Doing some mill and overlay work. And then as we do this kind of work, we're going to need some general administration over those dollars as well. So this was the recommendations. This would allow us to increase our sidewalk program by 20%, obviously allow us to address some of the street lighting backlogs that we have that we haven't been able to get to and get funded, as well as some smart lighting initiatives as well. The next item, the Treasury Department has indicated that housing services to support healthy living environments and neighborhoods conducive to mental and physical wellness are eligible uses of the fiscal recovery funds. So in this regard, what we looked at and what we would recommend to you is that we look at putting aside $1 million towards demolition and lot clearance, that we put aside $500,000 towards the land bank operations, that we would look at modeling within the qualified census tracts a housing rehabilitation program that's very similar to the program that we have in the East Village TIF, that we would look at a down payment assistance program within the qualified census tracts as well, with those looking at providing $5,000 of down payment assistance for individuals that would buy a house in our qualified census tract areas, but up to a house like price threshold. We don't want someone who may be able to afford a $250,000 house or a $300,000 house, because there are houses like that even within the qualified census tract areas, to be able to receive that kind of benefit. But looking at trying to get that investment in those areas, looking at kind of a citywide neighborhood mini grant program, which would allow the neighborhoods to come up with programs for promoting how they could use these dollars to improve their neighborhoods or improve their neighborhood associations. And then obviously the administration of this, if we have any kind of additional programming like this, it's going to take some additional community development staff to manage that. So that rolls up to the $2.5 million for the neighborhood revitalization. On the economic development side, again, looking at this, one of the things that the fiscal recovery funds can be used for is to support small businesses with loans, grants, in-kind assistance, and to help speed the recovery of impacted industries. So as we looked at this, there's a number of different programs that the economic development team wanted to recommend that we would look at trying to implement that would help us to kind of kickstart our small businesses, help them out, but also to try and really focus on innovation and job creation. So there's a number of different programs here, but as I look at it, there's really about $800,000 towards business innovation. There's the Business Innovation Grant Program and the Business Innovation Spark Program, which would be designed at trying to promote the creation of jobs and promote businesses that are trying to move in an innovative way to develop, invest with distillery labs, and to look at how we can use business advancement and entrepreneurship to promote our creative businesses in our community. Then in addition, there was probably another $800,000 or more that would be set aside for specifically trying to help the physical condition of our businesses. And that would be through the facade improvement programs, our small-scale development programs. It would be looking at increasing in a city revolving loan program, looking at trying to work with commercial landlords that have vacant properties to do a rent reduction program where we could help to incent businesses to move into those vacant spaces, or possibly even taking commercial corridor sections where we might have 5 or 6 vacant properties and leasing them up and trying to encourage the business community to come forward with developing a way to provide pop-up businesses within that same retail space in that commercial corridor in order to activate the space and to activate our neighborhoods. We've also set aside some funds for workforce training and workforce development and for some of our economic development partners to help them to leverage up what they're doing, and then would recommend that to do this, we're going to need some administration dollars as well to go forward with this from an economic development standpoint. As I mentioned earlier, the social determinants of health are an eligible expense under the guidelines that were set out by the federal government. And what those social determinants of health are the environmental and social conditions that affect the health outcomes, specifically economic stability, healthcare access, social context, neighborhoods, built environment, and education access. So when we talk about our health outcomes, we talk about people who are most susceptible to the pandemic. It's people that are living in housing that isn't as good as everybody else's. It's for people that don't have access to health care. It's for people that have had a challenge from an educational attainment standpoint. So all of those elements play a part in those factors. And this is an opportunity with the county coming forward saying, we're willing to put up $2.4 million. If the city will do the same, we can match this and try and develop some impact in this specific area. That's something that they've looked to recommend. We've set aside just a small amount, $600,000 annually, for that effort and that initiative. In addition, the Treasury Department has specifically authorized evidence-based community violence intervention programs that prevent violence and mitigate the increase in violence during the pandemic are allowable uses of the fiscal recovery funds. And knowing that we have a significant crime issue in our city, we wanted to set aside some of those dollars towards violence reduction. Overall, as we look at this, and what staff recommended here is only for the first 2 years of funding. We have not recommended 4 years of funding at this point in time, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But what we were looking at is that of the $18 million that we've recommended here for spending, 75% of that funding would be spent within these qualified census tracts. So it's looking at trying to put the resources towards the need that we have. And that's something that we wanted to focus on. So as I mentioned, we only put together recommendations for 2 years. And the reason that we only recommended 2 years is that this is a unique opportunity for us to use these dollars in a completely different way. And we can start to look at this and we can gauge our effectiveness of how we've been able to implement over the first year, and then survey the community and say, are there changes you'd like to see us make? And so we could look at making those adjustments as we go from year 2 to year 3 to year 4. Now, we put the first 2 years together simply because we have a biennial budget that we have to come forward with to make those recommendations. So in closing, I just wanted to say, and then we can get to your questions and comments and concerns, is that what we wanted to do was put something together to position this for you to react to and to tell us, here's where we'd like you to make some changes, make some directional changes with this. But one thing you'll note that's not here with this, what's not here is any money to restore operational reductions that we made as part of the pandemic last year. And there's a specific reason for that. The reason for that is that we have seen our revenues improve based upon the recovery to date. And so because of that, I've asked departments, along with the finance director, for departments to submit their budget requests to us, including any requests that they may have for positions that have been reduced prior. And from that, we would be able to craft a budget recommendation for you that would include and take into consideration some of those cuts that we've made to the departments. And so we looked at that as really, we have the resources now within our operating budget, looking ahead to 2022, so we can make that really a budgetary decision as we come back to you at the first meeting in October. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or address any concerns in the document, or take any direction from the council as the council sees fit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you to you and your team for putting together both the analysis and the recommendations for spending. I want to start off by thanking the public. I mean, 884 responses to the survey, I think is rather significant. We appreciate your input. We hear you. And I think many of the recommendations comply with the priorities that were given by the public. So thank you, public, for your feedback and weighing into this discussion and considerations for funding. I also want to say it's very critically important that we try to leverage this funding as much as possible. We can do that through collaboration. We can do that by using it to try to get additional funding from other sources, working with partners, applying for additional external funding, whether it's private, federal, or state funding. But let's leverage as much as we can and collaborate, because this is kind of a one-time opportunity for us to do something important for Peoria. I'm going to throw out one question, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion and other questions, you mentioned, Mr. Manager, that in terms of staffing for restoring certain operations, you would prefer not to address that within the American Relief Plan Act funding. You would rather address that through the regular budget because revenues are starting to pick up again.
Revenues are starting to pick up, and the important thing is that these dollars are finite. Once we've spent them, and we have 4 years to spend them, they're gone. So we need to make the staffing considerations based upon what we think are going to be our long-term revenue needs that we have, and so that's why we made those recommendations. The staff that we've identified in these recommendations for economic development or for community development would be temporary employees that would only be here as long as this grant funding was around. So these would not be considered to be permanent positions that would stay on into perpetuity. So that's the distinction that I think is important to make here, is if our revenue picture has improved, we should look at our operating budget and say, what can we afford? That's truly a policy decision for the council to make in terms of that regard.
Okay, so I say that, and I'll just say one of the elephants in the room is funding for public safety, funding for more police officers, funding for more firefighters. There's pain there. I think we've heard the pain. I think the public has felt the pain. I think that we've felt the pain. So that's one of the areas that you're suggesting is better appropriated for in the regular budget process.
I do, because I also believe that our revenue situation has improved, and so we can have that conversation in the context of what it would cost fully to restore however many positions council wants to discuss doing. And like I said, that's a policy discussion for you to have, and we'll certainly provide some recommendations on maybe on some paths of how we get there. But I think that's something that we could look at. I haven't heard yet from the police chief or the fire chief what their needs are going to be. That's something I'd like to hear from them as they submit their budgets at the end of the week.
By the end of this week, those recommendations are due from the chiefs.
The departmental submissions are due, and then it'll take us 3 to 4 weeks to put the final recommendations together for you.
Will we hear those recommendations before our next policy session on the ARPA funds?
Well, overall, what it would normally be is that we would receive those recommendations. We'll compile it, and we'll document what the request was and what the recommendation of the manager and the finance director are as we present a recommended budget to you. So what I've asked the departments to do, because we're in a different fiscal situation than we were in last year, where we were looking and we were talking all the time about making expense reductions. We're at a point where we can talk about putting some level of service restoration back in, as long as we have the resources to be able to sustain it. And so I think that's the piece that we have that opportunity to look at. I just don't know what that total ask is yet until I get all that information back from the departments.
I understand. I just think it would be good to know those recommendations prior to the next policy session on the American Relief funding, so that our eyes are fully open relative to the entire budget scenario.
Sure.
So. Questions, comments, thoughts, opinions? Let's hear from the council. Councilmember Greb?
Manager, why in the world, with all of the crises we have in the city of Peoria right now, would we proceed at such a leisurely pace to spend the money that we need to stabilize our city? Why 4 years?
Well, Councilman, again, it's looking at trying to sustain the impact of these dollars. It's looking at a revenue situation that's improving. It's looking at, and we don't know as we move into this, we're in the Delta variant now, if there's another variant, if that's going to impact our revenues over time. But it's looking at trying to draw those dollars out over a 4-year period in order to provide that level of support to the community. And the level of support, quite frankly, that I think that we can provide to the people that have been impacted by the pandemic. And I think as our recovery moves forward, if there are concerns that we have about operational spending of the city, I think it can be handled in our operating budget, and we can handle that and restore those. If council wants to do that, that's up to council to decide as part of the budget process.
Well, it seems to me that we know right now what our needs are as it relates to public safety. We already know we have an epidemic of gun violence that is a huge health issue for this community. We're on our way to a record number of homicides in the city of Peoria. We know that we cut a firehouse that is behind the 8 ball in more ways than one because of a ping pong game, a cruel ping pong game that played out a number of months ago. And that was supposedly pandemic induced. Same thing with cutting a number of yellow trucks out there, and we have storms from like 22 to 17. We've got winter coming on, we've got violence continuing, and we've had fires that have killed dogs, people, and fire captains. This is not a time to proceed in a leisurely fashion to fill in these gaps. We don't have that time, and my constituents are not interested in having this be drawn out for 4 years when already the crises are upon us, and everybody in this room knows they are. So to continue to dilly-dally and, as Nero would do, fiddle while the city burns is absolutely irresponsible. The time to act is now with these funds. They were appropriated for a reason, and I suspect not using them in a timely fashion might also create a problem where there'd be a clawback later on. Who knows what's going to happen in 4 years? As you pointed out, there are many vagaries as it relates to the variant, let alone what the federal government might be doing in 4 years and where these funds might go if not spent in a timely fashion, and God knows they're needed right now. So that's my contribution for now, but believe me, I'll have more to say.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Member Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Manager. This was a great presentation. I could tell a lot of detailed work has gone into this, and so I'm still processing a lot of it. But one of the questions that I had was under the infrastructure section, and I know that you all have did this 2 years at a time, and I'm looking at under 2022 and 2023 specifically, and none of those projects are listed are within District 4. And so I do have to advocate for my constituents that I would love to see a project done within my district using these funds because we do have some infrastructure needs. Now, I know based off of the presentation, these projects have to be in these qualified census tracts. So is there any type of flexibility that we could utilize to make sure that there is, I know that we're trying to provide equity in some of our most distressed areas, and as a native Peorian, I understand what those areas are, but I do have to advocate for my constituents, and so I want to see, is there any flexibility there, sir?
There is some flexibility, and you know, some of the, we mentioned earlier that 75% of the funds are proposed to be spent within the QCTs, but within those qualified census tracts. But what we were looking at is not only do we have these fiscal recovery funds, but we also have a capital budget that we're preparing as well, and that's going to have capital projects. And so, you know, as staff is looking at where projects are arising, there may be opportunities for us to put more of our capital dollars into Districts 4 and 5 that aren't affected by this, or in the areas of the city that aren't really affected or seeing as much of the money as coming forward through the CIP program. So there are some other pieces that of a kind of a larger fiscal picture that we don't have yet, and you know, we'll be working on here over the next month to prioritize those projects, put that together, and make recommendations to you. A good example is the Glen Avenue project. You know, the Glen Avenue project from University Street to War Memorial Drive is probably an $8 million project. We have received some, through the state's Rebuild Illinois program, we've received grant funding that's going to allow us to pay for that whole project and be able to supplement that. So that's one significant road project that is going on that's in District 4, and that will be in the capital budget that you receive here in a month.
Yeah, thank you, and we are very appreciative of that. And then my last question for now is, I know that, again, you're right now that we're looking at 22 and 23, and then there'll be a remaining 18 million or so. Let's say, for instance, in 24, something catastrophic happens, and we're needing to access that entire amount of capital at that time. Do we have the flexibility to do that, or once this is approved at $9 million per year, we can only spend up to $9 million?
No, this is just a recommendation to the council. If the council wants to accelerate the dollars for an allowable use under the law, we could certainly do that. The nice thing about these dollars is that they're flexible. We've been, as local government, we've been advocating for the federal government to give us dollars with very few strings attached, and this is one of those programs that they've actually done that. So we do have some flexibility with these funds, as long as it's within kind of those broad parameters that were laid out earlier in the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a couple of questions. I have been somewhat, and I appreciate the hard work that staff has done in terms of outlining the priorities. Number one, on the last page, you talk about review community input and prioritize ideas and suggestions. Well, we've got a lot of that tonight. What happens if over the next year or so, the community deems something of greater importance that needs to happen? And I'm speaking specifically in regards to infrastructure projects. We have two schools in District 1 that one of them, McKinley, that has been closed as a school for more than 50 years. And we also have Harrison, which I have been told is full of old tires. And I'm glad we're not on air tonight because I don't talk about this publicly, but we know how often people set fires in old buildings. And so I'm just concerned about us letting these structures continue to sit with the potential for, we've been told on some of the tours that we've had groups of people living in these buildings. And in one situation, we were told McKinley, there was some folks that were doing crack parties in there. And so, and that you could go in there if you were a user on any given time. It was just known public, that was the place to go. So, people have stressed the need that these hazards, enormous hazards, that, need to come down sooner rather than later. And I'm just concerned that if we kick the can down the road another 4, 5, 10, 20 years, we've got some real problems on our hands.
Councilwoman, that's a great comment, and your comment about what can we do if the community says that there's additional needs. That was the whole point behind saying that we would continue to survey the community about what they see as those needs. The reason that we didn't include Harrison or McKinley in this is that we've made official requests of our federal legislators, and currently both of those buildings are slated to receive a congressional earmark for demolition purposes. So we're working, Congresswoman Bustos advocated on behalf of the Harrison School building, so hopefully that works its way through Congress as their spending initiatives are moving forward. And then Senator Durbin put in for McKinley School. So fingers crossed, we're working with our federal legislators to try and get the funds to be able to demolish both of those buildings.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm well aware of that, but it's not a secret that it's known that it's going to take millions of dollars. So I'm speaking of beyond what we might get from the federal government. We already know that it's going to take millions of dollars to level both of those. So I appreciate the fact that we've already been applying for dollars, but what I'm saying is we've got to begin the process of just securing enough money to at least take one down and then towards the other, because if we continue to keep our fingers crossed and apply for, a grant here and there, we know how that situation is. Sure. And so we've got to prioritize, because there's the feeling that if this doesn't happen with some of these funds, it's not gonna happen for a long time, and we just cannot lose this valuable opportunity to make a significant contribution towards getting rid of some of this blight and making room for what people would like to see as new affordable housing, so that we can begin the process of trying to recoup, grow our property tax base. Because quite honestly, I appreciate the fact that we've got the land bank, but I would venture to say, Mr. Manager, that we could easily put people in new affordable housing than we could by the time it would take us to recoup some of these properties through the land bank process. We know we've got people waiting to become first-time homeowners, but we just don't have an inventory of stock. And so we've got to address this.
So, and that's the reason why we've tried to take the kind of multifaceted approach that we were recommending with the neighborhoods. Not only having some of the money, the larger share going towards demolition and looking at trying to take down some of the abandoned and blighting properties in the qualified census tracts, but then also supporting the land bank operations to put some of those properties that can be back on the tax rolls back on it, provide housing rehab dollars to homeowners that currently exist that are looking to rehab their properties but maybe don't have the resources or the income to be able to do it. And then also looking at how we can leverage other dollars. The mayor mentioned that there's other resources that we can be looking to. We're going to receive additional home dollars and additional CDBG dollars that we can leverage into additional projects that is coming from this same American Rescue Plan. So we're going to have a larger amount of grant dollars to be able to spend on affordable housing, on those types of issues as part of this American Rescue Plan. So the resources are going to be larger, and that will be part of the budget presentation that we give to you here next month.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Euler?
Chairwoman, I just want to give some comments to the city manager. I like how this was laid out, and I think at least from my standpoint, taking a broader focus than just looking at this as district-specific issues. I think the priorities for how you've broken through this are in the right places, especially with the guidance that we've been given. I will say, though, with some of Councilman Allen's comments and discussion I had with Councilman Sear today, that this obviously is heavily focused in the first and some into the second and third districts. The money from the federal or from the state government that out of their budget is also significantly focused in the first district, and we've also got to have some type of equity when it comes to how we're distributing funds throughout the community. And I would really like to see our operations budget have more of a focus on the fourth and fifth districts when we get to that point, because a significant amount is being focused in the more southern part of the city, but there's also projects that need to be done in the fourth and fifth district. And I'd like to see if these two areas between the state and federal government are not going to be focusing there, that maybe this year that more of our focus is there than it has been in the past. Because I'll also say, if you go back and calculate the last several years' budgets and add up where we spend our capital money by district, that also is in large part in the first district and spilling into the second. And so appreciate the work here, and I think we're headed down the right direction. This is obviously one-time money. It's not something that's going to continue past this period, and we have to ensure that the expenses that we're using it for are not signing us up for continual expense beyond what this money will last us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, City Manager, for working so hard on all this, and all your staff for having such an engaged process. I think it's important, and it's really notable that we had 884 responses. And I guess that's where I'll start, because I do question some of the priorities based on those responses. I know you've explained that you want to focus on adding positions for public safety when we get to the budget. But I think it's really important to note, I mean, if you look at the submissions we got on both, on the survey and also the open-ended responses, restoring operations was ranked 5 in the regular survey, but if you look at the open-ended responses, it really, the second highest thing was restoring operations and public safety. And I think this proposal ignores that. That is a real priority, and I question, I mean, how healthy are our finances? Are we, and I know we have to wait until you get the numbers and the requests, but I think we need to at least restore some of the positions that we eliminated because of COVID, and we eliminated 11 firefighters. And I mean, I'm just guessing, but I'm speculating that's not going to be part of the proposed budget. Is that right?
So the reason that it's not, and one of the other reasons that it's not included is that restoring operational funds, restoring the positions that we have and using these finite dollars means that you're creating a future obligation for the city that if you don't have the resources available to pay for it, you've got a bigger problem. But we were looking at this of saying operational restorations, we need to look at that in the light and in the context of our revenue situation. There have been some material changes that have changed our revenue picture to the good, and that one of those is that we have been able to see the change in how we tax internet purchases, and that's helped to increase our sales tax numbers considerably. So that provides us a little bit of cushion. We've also seen that overall the investments that have been made by the police and fire pension boards has improved, and we've had 3 good years that are on our 5-year smoothing average. That's going to help us to mitigate some of that growth in pension costs in the out years. So that's good news. So there's a couple of factors that are at play that are going to help us as we look at the budget moving forward. But again, my concern as your manager is that I can't recommend restoring operating cuts with these dollars because these dollars are finite and they will be gone, and then we're going to have that obligation going forward. That's the reason why you don't see those recommendations here.
But it's my understanding that we're going to have those numbers, because I question, I mean, the financial outlook looks great now, but I've been on this council long enough where we're told that at this time of year, and then 6 months down the road when we're in the middle of the budget, we have to cut and do things midway through. So I'm worried, with the Delta surgence. I mean, even what just happened last week, the jobs report nationally was much lower than what they thought. So, I don't want to rely on all of that for restoring some of the public safety. And that brings me to my second point. And I don't know if staff is here, but I'd like to know, my understanding is that our fire department is cut so low that we're putting firefighters and people at risk, and it's not safe. So if he's here, I'd like him to answer those questions, or I would like that before we have a meeting again, because I think that is a relevant part of this discussion.
Well, I'd be happy to work with the fire chief to put together a report for you that will show you what the data is as we have it as of today. I don't think he has that data. I know that we have seen that response times have gone up, but we'll pull all the information and give you a more comprehensive report and give that report back.
And on those lines, I know I'm going over my time already. I think I'd like to see even more money put in this the violence reduction program, and I have questions about it. It's real vague in the report about what that program will be and what that entails. I think, like Councilman Grab pointed out, crime is on the rise here, and we need to, I think, focus some more of this money on that, and that could be also hiring more police officers and doing. So I'd like to know more about those programs that you're proposing that we're going to fund.
Again, what you have in front of you is just simply conceptual at this point in time. What we would do is continue to work on refining that. The Congress said, and the law states that it can be used for evidence-based programs. So what we would be working with is trying to identify what are some of those those evidence-based, those programs that have been studied and proven to be effective at reducing violence in a community, and what would it take to fund and to adequately fund those. And it might be that $300,000 isn't enough, so that is something that we can certainly take into consideration as we look at that to see what those dollars would have to be.
Okay, and then I do have questions too about, the infrastructure. One of the things on there is that MacArthur overlay, and I question, is that needed? Didn't we just do that when we redid the bridge there?
So the MacArthur overlay is the section that is at the very top of MacArthur and Moss before you get to the bridge.
Okay.
It
Okay.
is literally just that small
little
section
section.
that is in horrible condition that needs to be fixed.
Okay. I have further questions, but I know other people, we need to give them an opportunity. Just real quick, I also concur with Councilman Grab in that we should be spending more of the money up front than spreading it out evenly over the next 4 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Riggenbach?
And thank you, Mr. Manager, and all the department heads that were involved in this. Quite a detailed and comprehensive look for us. I think my colleagues have hit a couple nails on the head here. The one-time use of this funds, I don't think we can stress that enough, that these are finite dollars, and that to make long-term obligations with the finite dollars would be the height of irresponsibility, in my opinion, and that would put the city at risk more than anything else. So Councilwoman Jensen did a nice job of highlighting some of the recent economic data, which shows that we're not out of the woods yet, that we definitely have seen some good numbers coming in, but this is far from over. So let's not overcommit ourselves to things that are going to come back to bite us and cause those mid-course corrections later. I think this is extremely wise, prudent, and yes, very deliberate in the response. And Mr. Manager, I'll talk to you offline about some specifics, under each of these topics. Under infrastructure, I'd like to know more what that smart lighting pilot looks like, or what kind of, what will the land bank operations involve under neighborhood revitalization. So obviously the devil's in the details as far as the specifics go, but I think overall this gives us a very responsible blueprint, and one that allows us, as the mayor mentioned, the ability to leverage some of these dollars with others and with collaborating, as you've already highlighted, with the county. It's going to allow these dollars to be multiplied. So just one other thought here, that I want those listening to be aware that Peoria Public Schools, CityLink, the Airport Authority, they have also received similar funding and resources. So it's important that we don't duplicate things, but I think to what the mayor alluded to, finding ways to collaborate, since we've all got this. In the 12 years I've been on council, I've never been handed a pot of money like this. So this is an extremely gratifying discussion to be having, but one I think we need to make sure that we show that we are the adults in the room who know how to plan for the future. So looking forward to further discussion, and Mr. Manager, I'll really be looking forward to some more detail as to some of these specific items under the agenda, under the bullet points. So thank you, Madam
Thank
Mayor.
you. Councilmember Ruckriegel?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. City Manager, thank you, and thank your team for putting this together. One of the things that we talked about, I think, a couple weeks ago was the fact that once we had something out here to start, it gives us a place where we can have a conversation. And this is definitely some great work. couple things I'd like to see on it, and I think they're probably things that you have in your database preparing this, but it would also be good, I think, for us and for the public, is if we can see some metrics behind these. When we're talking about sidewalks and mill and overlay, how many blocks, how many miles are we looking at to be able to do? I think that helps us be able to sort of put a number around what the impact could be there. And I think those metrics can actually be taken throughout this presentation. On our economic development, for example, if we're looking at the Business Innovation Grant or the Spark money, how many businesses a year do we hope to intend to be able to see? On the workforce training, how many people do we intend for that to be able to affect? On the master lease pop-up, do we know today how much vacant commercial space we have? And in 4 years, if this is continued for 4 years, if it's continued for 2, what do we hope that commercial space looks like? So we're not just moving business A from one location to the other location, but we still have the same net commercial space empty. You mentioned partnerships with the county on a couple of items, and I'm imagining that they're probably having to work within some of the same census tracts that we are as well. And I think it would be good to sort of see even where we could partner more with them. Do our housing programs and our business programs, can we actually leverage more dollars if we work together versus them having their own programs? It also could free up some dollars for administration, because grants of a larger size or a larger capacity can actually be handled by the same number of people, and so maybe there's some efficiencies there that can actually invest more of these dollars back into our community. I think it's been said here tonight, and I would also echo this, that I think it's important for us to be able to see this with the actual budget that's proposed, and I think also for the city. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, because these are finite dollars, but we've got some other costs that may be going on, but also too that as we see that the investments that this frees up may be other investments that we can do in districts, the top of the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. How does that all look at? So at the end of the day, we can see what our budget would be, what these additions allow us to do, and we can see the impact not only for part of Peoria, because I think what the intended effect from what I see and what we've talked about is, if we do this right, we should see a better revenue stream at the end of this throughout the whole city, and so we're impacting the whole city. And if we could look at how that would do on the budget. One thing I'm not necessarily seeing here, and maybe I'm wrong, help me fill me in, is some money set aside for public health services that we may not know that we need at this point. We had to put some dollars into public service safety, as far as vaccine sites, quarantining, and I'm imagining that if the Delta and the Mu viruses start to wave a little bit, we're probably not going to get another check from the federal government very soon. And so we've got to probably be able to plan for those. And I don't know, if we want to take a little bit of this just to make sure that we've got it. I know we've got future years that we can do there. And I guess, and I've heard some of my colleagues say this, and I would echo this, is I like the fact that we're sort of dividing this over 4 years, but I don't know that it means that the same amount of dollars have to go to each thing all 4 years, that maybe certain things take time to ramp up, such as a down payment program might take the economy just getting a little bit more revved up to be able to have people really looking, who might be first-time home buyers, for that, while our dollars towards a violence protection might be needed in the forefront a little bit. So maybe there's a scaling of that versus let's just put that same amount in each one of those. And I think I've heard that, from some of my fellow council members, that those additional dollars upfront on violence may also work. And just for clarification, I think this is important for the public to know as well, although we made some budget decisions that we had to at the beginning of COVID, we are continuing to hire firefighters. I think we just had a graduation class not too long ago that came out, correct? And we've also hiring police as well, correct? So while the public may not know that, I think we around the council know that that is happening. And I think there was actually a very large graduation class of firefighters that I think we ought to be celebrating that those hirings are continuing. Am I correct on that?
You are correct. We had 16 firefighters, and we just swore in 5 police officers today.
Okay, and I think that I hope is the headline in the newspaper tomorrow, because I think people think we have stopped that. And I think that's very important for the public to know. And, something that my time on council here, and even before my time on council, and, I would like to talk to the police chief about this, offline a little bit. Something we've never talked about is the use of 2-person teams on our police cars. If we could send one car with 2 police officers and 2-man police officers into areas that might take several of the resources, that could also provide, I think, added intensity to maybe mitigate a situation where we're not having to wait for backup, but it also could maybe give us a different ability to have an effect within some of our areas. And I don't know that all teams have to be that way, but I think it's something that we ought to look at. We never talk about beefing up our police teams, and I think there might be appropriate at certain times within our weekly schedule. And so I look forward to talking with the police chief about that as well. Otherwise, I see some really good things here. I look forward to the conversation. My last, thought process that I'd like to have you come back with as well is, and I see this on the economic side, but as the others as well, as we get done with these 4 years of money, and maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 4 years, how do we wind down? Because it's really easy to start a program, but once a program gets started, everybody gets upset when the funds run out. And we talk about that happening sometimes with operational costs, but I think we've also got to be clear on some of these development programs that our intent is for this jumpstart to be able to help into the effect that they're doing. But what happens as we wind those down, or as we need to have other participants be able to pick up those dollars? So just I know it's a lot to throw at you, and you've done a lot of work. I think a lot of those pieces are probably in your mind already, or relationships you've already built, with the county. And I look forward to those answers as we continue this conversation.
Thank you, Councilman Rodrigo. I hear thoughts about sustainability of programs, and maybe that's something that we can speak to relative to the recommended programs. How are they sustainable? How do we plan to sustain them after the funding has run out? Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, Mr. Manager, just a little nitpicky thing on slide number 4, the third item, payroll and covered benefits for public health. We are talking about city employees, are we not?
No, we're talking, what this was intended to be was, well, I guess, no, let me back up. It's yes and no. I mean, it could be employees that were on the front lines of the pandemic, or it could be, the way Congress wrote up this was for moderate to low-income workers that are working in places such as grocery stores, childcare, that's a possibility that you would be looking at for the premium pay. Is that what?
No, I'm not speaking of premium pay. Speaking of public health, healthcare, human services, and public safety staff. And specifically about healthcare.
So this
are these city employees employed in healthcare?
This would be potentially public safety staff.
Okay, I understand.
That are providing
I understand.
services.
My question is about public health.
We really don't have we work in partnership with the city county health department. They're county employees that provide the direct public health services to our
Okay,
community.
so that was my question. In other words, they're not eligible for what we're talking about.
Well,
From us.
No, you could give money if you wanted to, I believe that it's an allowable expense if you wanted to support the public health efforts of the city county health department. I wouldn't recommend it because they've got so much money right now that they've received from other parts of the American Rescue Plan dollars
That was,
that
That
they
was
have the
my
support
point.
that's
Okay.
there that's eligible to provide.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
Next, going to slide 16 and beyond. Infrastructure is wait a minute, let me begin by saying the COVID effect was a 18-month effect, and it was really, really difficult on this government, but also on our economy, on our people. And it seems to me that the deficiencies were sharp, were difficult, and that's what we should be concentrating on. I have some sympathy for Councilman Grabb's comments in that if we lost this much in the last 18 months, let's work on replacing this instead of dragging it out or including a whole lot of other things that were not affected by this. So, in the case of infrastructure, now I don't know the answer to this. I'm not a good attorney here, Mr. Manager, but did we cut $700,000 out of street lighting, $500,000 out of smart lighting pilot, and perhaps $870,000 out of sidewalks?
We did suspend almost $20 million in capital projects last year. That included a number of these areas that we're talking about where we did suspend many of those projects. Some were bigger picture items or bigger ticket items that we had that we didn't do some of the road projects. That will be coming back as we present the budget to you. We'll be talking about how we'll be able to next year increase some of that spending on roadways and on roadway infrastructure. What we were looking at with this infrastructure investment was how we can be more impactful, not only in the neighborhoods that we're recommending that we do this, but as a city. We've been able to increase, for example, by 20% the amount of money that we're investing in sidewalks. By looking at then saying, smart technology can help us solve other issues that we see that are causing problems in older neighborhoods. So let's look at how we can use that lighting in a different way in order to be more impactful. And maybe that's something that we can leverage up as we go forward.
Okay. The thing I would be most interested in infrastructure is what we cut. Okay? I think those other things are suitable for our budget discussion.
So Councilman, what I would say is we didn't cut anything. We suspended projects that are going to be coming back to be spent this year.
The suspension of those was due to lack of revenue from COVID.
And caution that we had with...
Why not take this money that we're getting to make it up from COVID and unsuspend those projects instead of permanently setting back our public works schedule? Okay, it seems to me we should be doing with this money and with the budget money twice as much, and then we will be caught up with where we should have been. All right, that's my comment. With neighborhood revitalization, wait a minute here. Oh, yes. We have, if we're going to do something out of the ordinary, it seems to me that as I think you know, my priority on that list, and it's not everyone's priority, my priority is down payment assistance, helping people to become homeowners in these neighborhoods. I don't have any big problem with anything here, except out of all this money, down payment assistance of $250,000, or $750,000 over 3 years, does not sound like a lot, and I think that would really, really help some of these areas. Okay, and then our violence reduction program. First of all, I'm not aware of our violence reduction program, and I believe the qualifier is evidence-based, and I think everyone around this horseshoe would be thrilled to death to know that there are evidence-based violence reduction programs, and we'd be willing to fund them. But if we're using them now, they don't seem to be working very well. And if we're not using them now, I don't know why we're not. If this is something new, this sounds great. I'd love to believe it, but we need more info on that. Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Kelly. And related to evidence-based violence prevention, there's a group that's been vetting proposals that meets every 2 weeks, vetting various proposals that are evidence-based. So it's going through an exercise right now, exploration process.
Great.
Okay. I'll give you an update on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Seer? Oh, sorry, let me get you turned on here.
Madam Mayor? Okay, is it on?
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, for this report. I'm glad that's just a starter. We're just starting the conversation. I appreciate the comments from my colleagues to my left, my two colleagues over there talking about the 5th District and the 4th District. So you obviously know, Mr. Manager, how I feel about that. You and I had a conversation. So some of the comments I want to make first that I want to make sure people understand, especially people listening. The job report we received Friday, it was a good report in my opinion, because what it means is the government will keep funding or put liquidity in all these programs that we all want, and money will come over here. So it's a great report as far as putting liquidity into the market for all of us. Number two, the report that we're getting, it's just my 5th year sitting around this horseshoe. We had many surveys, and none of the surveys we have in the past, in my opinion, were pretty good. This time, a lot of effort was put in the survey. We still only get 850 some respond. I'm not happy personally about that. I'm not satisfied. Not that I'm mad, but I'm not satisfied, because just look at our election we just had for our mayor. I mean, we get, 15,000 people that vote these elections, and all of us around this horse always say, wow, the vote is so low, voting record. So until really we get, this is very, very important as far as I'm concerned. I don't say it is for everybody here. It's $45 million. We've got, $37 million to go. 800 opinion or wish list, to me, it's not enough. We need to keep working to get more. And until we get, to my opinion, at least 15,000 of our constituents say, hey, I really care about this money. I'm glad you're asking for my opinion. So I'm not very satisfied with 800, and I hope one day we get to 15,000. Let's move into some. I don't like some of the comments I'm hearing tonight. Unfortunately, when you're the last one to go, a lot of the questions I had have been asked already, or the comments have been made already. I don't like how many employees, Mr. Manager, the city had before COVID-19 hit us.
Well, we had about 675, and we're down now to about 615.
So we lost about 62 employees. So with these employees, when we talked to them, would we say you guys have been suspended? Because there's a word that some of us have used. Now, these people have been suspended. Some of these projects have been suspended. Some of these people have been suspended. I mean, some people lost their job. So another word we use is restore. You have used the word restore programs. I'm hoping that we can restore some of the program because Mr. Kelly, Councilman Kelly, I think did a fantastic job at talking about all these new programs. And we're talking about restoring programs, and then we got a bunch of new programs that staff wanted to start. So I'm a little confused about that. I'm glad this is only the first conversation because obviously I'm not happy about what's going on for the 5th District, but if we're going to restore a program, I'd like to see some of these programs restored in the 5th District also. Just two questions for you. Now, $18 million is what the staff want us to spend next 2 years. What percentage of that $18 million is operation and what percentage is capital improvement?
Well, looking at this, your capital is about 3.1 million, and then the operating expense, so about just under $6.4 million or 6.3 million, and then the remaining 12.1 would be operations.
So it's not what we're trying to stay away from with this one-time money, though. I remember the first packet we received, one of the phrases that really caught my attention was, let's try to invest this money in things that will pay dividend for years to come.
That's correct. And
operation having 12 million, that's 60%, right?
Well, but Councilman, I think what we're talking about is specific programs to focus on economic development and supporting our business community. Specific programs to strengthen our neighborhoods. Those dollars, and it's probably more because if you take out the capital funding or the demolition dollars, those are probably more capital than operations expenses. So what you're looking at, though, is how you can use these dollars to be impactful for the time period that you have them, and within those allowable pots that the federal government says that we can spend it. So that's why we were looking at it for business support, looking at it for neighborhood and household support, and looking at it to try and focus on the areas where we had the greatest need.
A lot of different words have been used tonight. A couple I want to use is how will we measure a return on investment, number one. Number two, how will we keep these programs? How will we get the accountability of all these programs, especially the new ones? Are a question for you, Mr. Manager. And the last one is, I know you're very smart, you're following the market and what's going on with the economy. The inflation year to date for the end of July was 5.4%. It was 2.2% in August. Why are you asking only for 1.4% inflation in the department heads for the budget?
I think that as we started to look at the budget, we asked them to put together a budget with some inflationary growth, and we felt 1.4% was a good starting point. We also told them that if they had needs that were over and above that 1.4%, that they could provide additional justification, and we would sit down and have that conversation with them.
So as you forecast your revenues for next year, what number will you use for yourself forecasting revenues?
In terms of forecasting revenues from an inflationary standpoint?
Correct.
We're probably not going to build in a significant inflationary factor into our budget in revenue growth just in order to be conservative as we put those revenue estimates together. We're going to look at what our historic trends are. We're going to be looking at what our current trends for this year are, and we'll build some projections based on that. But again, we're going to try and be as conservative as we can, as we always are with our revenue estimates going forward. But your point about inflation is well taken, and it's certainly going to affect our capital budget as we've seen that inflationary growth in the cost of material as we're looking at future road projects and as other future capital expenses. It means those dollars are not going to go as far as they did a couple of years ago.
That's correct. And also on the revenue side, though, with inflation that we have right now, if it keeps going, as we'll move toward the $15 an hour minimum wage and people making more money, hopefully, well, not hopefully, I think what's going to happen is obviously the cost of goods will go up, which means when cost of goods go up for us, it means more revenue because we're going to have taxes on the higher cost of goods, correct? So I'm assuming you'll put that in your budget, correct?
We'll take a look at what the trends are looking like, and we'll make those recommendations to you, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Velpula.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Manager, and city staff. You know, the most important things issues I hear every day are crime and joblessness and roads. So if we are going to deal the roads with infrastructure. That's a great thing. But again, the whole guidance that is mentioned today is focused on the fact, assuming that building the infrastructure or using the land bank system to retain the land value, that will offset the damages caused by the pandemic. But we forgot that all this in this process, there's a lot of jobs that are lost. Right? It's going to come back and bite us. So, in a simple way, we have. So, did you think about having an evidence-based programs that could really help the development of workforce? Because, in my opinion, increased crime, not able to maintain their lifestyle, probably is because of the loss of job. So, we create the infrastructure, we create everything, but if you don't have a job, that means if you don't have a strong workforce development, how do we really address the root cause?
So I think from our perspective, when it comes to workforce development, much of the economic development investment is really focused on trying to address those small business needs and how they can help to create a climate to hire more employees, look at what they can do to be creative with retraining employees that they may have to position themselves to go forward. I share your concern about workforce development and making sure that we have that employment that's there, because that's going to help a number of other factors. We had the police department had done a study with the University of Illinois at Chicago about factors that were affecting violent crime in the community, and one of those data points that they talked about was that crime goes down when employment goes up, and so that's something that we certainly need to look at as well.
And the second question I have is towards the crime, right? So we have a violence, something of a war.
Can you speak up just a bit, Councilman?
So there's a program about this violence reduction. So I just am curious to know what were the current police chief's thoughts on that program, and what do you think? What in his opinion, what infrastructure does he need to curb the crimes? And again, the last question is, we propose a lot of things in these documents, but what is your metric for success? How do you evaluate? How do you score it? So I just wanted to learn. So because every year we are going to go back and look at what was done, and what was the initiative, and did we really make it? So how do you look at what is your baseline?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're about to go into round 2, comments and questions, but before we do so, just one thought. There's no expectation for making any decisions tonight. I know that there's a lot of information that's been shared, but a lot of information may be still needed, a lot of thinking, maybe and additional talking that needs to be done. But one thing that kind of came out that stands out to me is the discussion over whether we agree with spreading the remaining funding. Remember, we took $10 million out. There was $48 million. We took $10 million out because we didn't want to take out a loan. Then staff were on furloughs, right? So we discontinued the furloughs, and we used some money to pay some back pay for that. So that was taken off the top. So what's remaining, I believe, is about 30. What's remaining, Mr. Manager?
It's about $36.8 million.
36.8. So the question is, do you think that this remaining funds should be spent over 4 years? Or do you think it should be spent over a lesser amount? From some, I heard that there's a greater need now than there might be later, so maybe more of the money should be spent now. Is there a different equation versus 25%, 25%, 25 and 25% is another equation that we should look at in terms of spending the rest of this money. So I'm just throwing that out there for consideration. And now I'll go to our round two, which starts with Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My first, just a clarifying question under the economic development programs, and my colleagues made some great suggestions regarding how we're evaluating the effectiveness of these programs. Just a clarifying question, though. So under the current proposal, if a entity applies for one of these grants, are they automatically going to be renewed each year, or do they have to reapply on an annual basis?
No, what we would be looking at would be trying to maximize the dollars as we could. We weren't looking at trying to make recurring funding for different organizations. We would look at this as saying, what's your need today? Let's look at how we can fund it, then calibrate the program in the next year to see if there's an additional need that we see in the community, and then offer up that solicitation at that point in time.
Okay, thank you. And my second comment is kind of based off of the mayor's comment as well, so thinking about how should we spread this money out. And then if possible, I would love to see the projected biannual budget to be able to really have the holistic picture of our financial situation to make the best decision regarding that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Graham?
Mayor Lee and Council, the decision rests with us, not the city manager. That's why we were elected. The buck stops with us. He proposes and we dispose. And I'm sorry, but we needed to have a correction a few minutes ago. Yeah, we've been hiring some police and fire, but you didn't indicate the number of people going out the door. That is extremely disturbing, that we would allow that kind of sophistry and disingenuousness to stand in this chamber. We all know better than that. Now, as for the babble, and Councilman Euler, I love you, but this is not a district issue. What we are talking about here is not a District 5 issue, District 4 issue, District 3 issue, District 2 issue, or District 1 issue. It is a City of Peoria issue. And we are all elected and swear an oath to represent all of our constituents. Let's stop talking about operational budgets like they don't matter. I can remember a number of months ago, we had a lot of howling, and rightfully so, about a firehouse that closed in North Peoria. And there should have been that howling because that impacted all of the city. All of the city. And we kept going back and forth down to Fire Station 4. That had to be closed. And then before you know it, it settles on the Hurlburt House, Station 8. We put that behind the 8 ball in this cruel game of ping pong that we played. Operations don't affect the 5th District. Next time we have a big snowstorm and that wind's whipping across the prairie, imagine 22 yellow trucks instead of 17. Believe me, I wore the at-large hat. I can tell you that the number of officers we have north of Ward Drive is not anywhere near where it needs to be, and I know that. So let us work together to enhance the staffing in these key, crucial operations that are vitally needed for our citizens, for their safety. And while we're talking about it, what about code enforcement? What my counselor friend has said, she's got falling in buildings going on down there. How do you maintain any degree of confidence in the integrity of this government when we let that happen? What kind of respect does it show to the people in District 1? This is not a district issue. We all have to work together to come together with a budget that makes sense, and it should not be city manager driven. I made a point to the city manager some time ago when some of you were scoffing about any American Rescue Act package ever being passed. There were snarky comments made ridiculing that. Oh, that's never going to happen. Here we are. We've had about $46 million pipelined to Peoria. I said to the manager, I'll bet you still won't want to fund fire safety, fire rescue the way you should if we had it. He said, well, why wouldn't I? Well, tonight, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we? I remember when I used to work for the school system, mayorally, and, I did that for a while. I remember boards of education. Good times and bad. It didn't matter. They didn't have money for the teachers or the kids. We don't have the money. Oh, a rainy day is coming. Hell, we can say now a pandemic has come. We need to start getting on with this. This is not a Tchaikovsky waltz of some sort. We have urgent needs for our citizens. We need to get the lead out and direct the city manager to come back with something that addresses the real needs of this community. And let's stop thinking that it is somehow superficial or not correct, or we're somehow not the adult in the room to talk about the impact operations have on all of us. You know what? When those gunshots go off, night after night, and I get nervous phone calls from people, you don't think those operations matter, right? Wrong. They matter terribly when the snow flies, the big storms come, and they can't dig people out for days on end. Who is held accountable? It's not the city manager. And city manager, I love you, but sorry, you're not an elected official. We are. And we damn well better control this, because we are all going to be held accountable for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Graham is correct that we are one city. We have to think as one city. I think about the first district having downtown. Hopefully we all think of downtown as being our downtown, not just the first district's downtown. What happens in downtown is really important to all of us. And there's been, quite a bit of investment made in the downtown and the warehouse district that's going to help the entire city. So I don't want us to get caught up too much into the district lines, although you are supposed to support your district if you're a district person or council elected official. You're supposed to look out and advocate for your district. I just don't want us to get too wrapped up. The other part of what Councilman Graham said is correct, that it is the council's decision. However, the city manager has done his job. He did what he's supposed to do. He analyzed, he and his team got together, they analyzed, they took into consideration the comments and the feedback from the public, and they made some recommendations. We don't have to accept all those recommendations. That's up to us. But he did his job, and he's come back, and he's wanting and needing some direction from this council. So that's what he's asking for. And I think that one of those areas of direction is, how much time do we want to what's the duration for which we should be spending this money? I think that those kind of parameters might help in bringing back a recommendation. Maybe it is 4 years, maybe it's 3 years. But I think that's a discussion that we should hold. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your comments. Believe it or not, I'll be short. I just want to remind the council that what we're talking about here is money that replaces money we had to cut because of COVID. This is not an operational discussion. This is not a budget discussion. That's coming. We had to make a bunch of cuts, nasty cuts, because of COVID. I think those are the things that we ought to be replacing at this point and not moving on to our favorite stuff. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Riggenbach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The longer the discussion goes, the more I'm finding things that everybody says I agree with. I think I really appreciate your comments about the one city, and Councilman Graham, you're hitting it on the head, that everything that happens in the 3rd district affects the other districts as well. And I think Councilman Allen also hit it on the head when he said this really needs to be part of the discussion with the budget. I mean, we're going to be getting the budget in less than a month now, so I think it would be premature for us to spend $9 million now without knowing how that's all going to fit together. So that would be my preference. And as far as the timing of the expenditure of the money, again, as I said earlier, I think I would err on the side of prudence on it. So starting off with the thought of a 4-year plan is something I could accept. If we have specific things that come before us that are more pressing, I certainly wouldn't say we can't do that. But I think looking at a 4-year spread would be a prudent way to go about it, and then making adjustments as we go. So I'll be brief and end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ruckriegel?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I guess to answer your question first, and for direction for the city manager, I think that it's maybe a good way to start, the 25, 25, 25, 25, but also in the categories underneath there, kind of where they go. But I think that as we go through there, you may find that maybe it's easier to front load some of those categories even. Maybe you keep it to 25, 25 on top, but maybe there's some front loading. Maybe it is that it front loads a little bit on that 25%, but I think those are things that the manager can bring back. For me, myself, I'm not tied to it's got to be equal all 4 years. I'd like to see what the impact is and what the end result's going to be. I guess my second comment is, city manager, did you first say that on Friday you're going to get the department heads and the final staffing, correct?
They'll be submitting their budgets to us, and then it'll take us a couple of weeks to put together the recommendations based upon that. I want to sit down with each department head and talk to them about what they're requesting, why they made the ask for what they're asking for, and then look at what we have as available resources to be able to give you a recommendation, as we always do, of what our spending plan would be for the upcoming 2 years.
And I appreciate the comments that are here tonight about staffing levels, and I think those are important things to be able to have. I think it's also important to realize that the staffing numbers we have now are not just because of COVID, but they're also because of some incentives that we as a council put into place that we knew were going to be long-term effect, but were going to cost us short term a little bit, and that there would have to be some rehiring because we couldn't hire those positions until we knew which ones were coming. So I think I hate to say it's a little bit of a catch up, but the fact that we were able to have some really good hiring already, I think, is important. And so let's not tell only half the story one way and not the full piece. Is we around this council, we chose to give incentives as part of the overall budget, which caused people to leave at a quicker rate. And we knew that we would have to backfill those positions. Now, whether we would have done that if we would have known what the full effect of COVID and all that would have been, that's a whole different story. But I think I say that because I think that the angst that we see on staffing here is not lost on anybody. We all feel that. And I think that's when we get to the budget for the year that you're going to be bringing us, which is why I think, and I've said this, many of the other council members have said this, we've got to see it in total. Because to see this part only by itself, I think you want direction. You're not saying approve this tonight, because
Correct.
you also realize that the two have to go hand in hand. Because I haven't heard any staffing levels from you, but if we dedicate operational dollars out of this right now, then some of these programs, whether that be infrastructure, investment in equity programs, investment in violence programs, somewhere we've got to cut those dollars out now. And what we're trying to say, I think, from what I hear you, from what I hear other governments saying as well, is we want to have the biggest impact. So if we can take these pieces, put them into place, the long-term effect when you bring that operational budget to us and put the two together will have a bigger impact than either one of these individually. I also think it was important tonight that Councilmember Riggenbach mentioned that all of our other governmental bodies in the other areas are going to be having this same discussion. And so it's important for us to see what the transit authority is going to be doing with their dollars, what the airport authority is going to be doing with theirs, what the county is going to be doing with theirs, because we often talk that we need to talk together. This is the time, if there ever was a time, for us to have the biggest impact, because we really don't have some $40-some million coming into our area. We've got a lot more when we take that in totality with what's coming into the school system and everything else, in the health department. And so I just say that because I hope as you bring that budget forward, we also see that collective impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's what I'm sensing, that's what I'm hearing, Mr. Manager, that we can't totally separate the two. There needs to be some integration, even in the considerations. We need to see the whole picture. So I just want to, this is not a vote, I'm just trying to see what you're thinking as a group in terms of whether you think right now, and of course that can change. This is just, I'm just trying to get some feel. Whether you think this ARPA funding should be front-loaded or whether you think it should be level spending, the same amount over a 4-year period, or do you think it should be front-loaded? So I just want you to just raise your hand. This is not a vote, but this kind of a poll, just to kind of get a feel for where everybody's thinking. If you don't mind, do you think it should be level spending? Is this what you're thinking right now? Do you think it should be leveled over a 4-year time period? Okay, couple. Do you think that was that 3? I think that was 3, that you think it should be leveled, same amount each year over a 4-year time period? Do you think it should be front-loaded? 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. 6, okay, 6, okay, okay. Okay. What's that? Oh, wait, just a second. Council.
When you say front-loaded, that doesn't mean it all has to be spent.
No, it doesn't
like the
mean
first year or
everything.
two, but more of it spent the first year or two.
Initially, right. Councilmember Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Council Member Gray. I think as we continue to talk to people and find out and watch how the variant continues to impact us, I think there might be occasions where the demand might be greater. So I think we have to be prepared to address those needs as they happen. We don't anticipate or hope that our schools will shut down again, but what if something happens? And so I think we just have to be prepared to be ready to address, front load and address emergencies as they arise, because I do think there are pressing needs out there.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Manager, I'm going to ask that you bring back a consideration that looks at both a level funded as well as a front loaded recommendation, how that might be spent out over
I'd be happy to.
a period of time. Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions? When is our next meeting, please?
Well, the next city council meeting will be next Tuesday.
That's our regular city council, but our next special meeting to discuss the budget.
We haven't actually set a date for a continued discussion of this. It was anticipated that at least from staff, that we'll be presenting the overall spending plan of the biennial budget proposal to you on October 12th.
Okay.
So that we'd come back with that at that point in
Okay.
time. It'll take us some time to compile all of the operating requests from the departments, to schedule time to meet with each one of the departments and sit down and talk with them, see what their needs are, make sure that we have the resources for it, and then provide those recommendations. So it'll take us a month to put all of this together for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your effort. And, everybody made some great points, some excellent points tonight. There was nobody that said anything that is wrong or inappropriate. And I just want to say, let's continue the discussion, and thank you for your service. I would ask, Madam Clerk, can we adjourn, or is there?
We need a motion to close the policy session first.
Okay, so motion by Councilwoman Jensen, seconded by Councilman Sear to close the policy session, right? Okay. And now we need a motion to adjourn. Is that right?
No, we need to take a vote
sorry.
on the
Madam
motion to
Clerk.
close. We need to take a vote on the motion to close the policy
Oh,
session.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, please cast your ballots. Passes. Proceed. Move to adjourn. Okay, seconded by Councilmember Allen. Cast your ballots. Thank you for your service. Hold it. Okay. Thank you for speaking up.
I'm not sure we asked for public comment, and we do have someone in the audience. I'm not sure if they're here to speak.
Not received any cards at this time, but
Anyone from the audience want to speak? Ms. Ross? Okay. All right. We're adjourned.